When the spill happened, we got a call at our office that there was oil that went into the Talmadge Creek, and we expected, to see a overturned truck or something like that. Half the river was black.
Very strong odor in the air. Just took your breath away. The sensation in your eyes, in your throat. If you try to take a deep breath in, you would feel a burning sensation all the way down, almost all the way down to your stomach. Migraines, headaches, lethargy, diarrhea.
For us here in Michigan, we never thought we were an oil state. My staff have never been trained at all for this type of event.
We had plans for tornadoes and even terrorists, but we never had a plan for an oil release.
Gulf oil spill was happening around the same time, and so all the resources were down there.
The July 25th, 2010 Enbridge Oil Spill into Michigan's Kalamazoo River was the largest and most expensive on-land oil spill in U.S. history. Unbeknownst to local citizens and first responders, Enbridge was pumping diluted bitumen, or heavy crude, through southern Michigan. That's the same kind of oil as tar sands crude that comes from Alberta, Canada. It is fracked out of the bedrock, and then chemicals are added to the gooey, peanut butter-like substance to make it viscous and capable of being pumped through a pipeline. But when an oil spill happens, the bitumen crude separates from the chemicals. The oil becomes heavy and sinks, and harmful chemicals like benzene are released into the air. Those chemicals sickened Sue Connolly's family and many in Marshall.
Within 3 days of the spill, my daughter started to develop a strange rash. Hundreds and hundreds of residents that could smell the odors that were impacted, that had health effects.
3 years after the Kalamazoo River spill, this tragedy holds warning signs and important lessons for communities in municipal, state, and the federal government. Oil pipelines now crisscross the entire country, running through Midwestern states that are not oil producers but have become oil transit zones. Many of them already carry Canadian tar sands oil. The recent disaster in Quebec, when a runaway train carrying oil blew up an entire town, highlights the perils of transporting oil by rail too. The country has entered a new and dangerous phase as we confront new fossil fuels, new ways to get them, and determine how to safely transport them.
The industry in Canada is planning to triple production by 2030. Folks who are concerned about climate issues are concerned about these production numbers, and that's part of the reason why you've seen such a big national uproar over Keystone XL.
Environmentalists are frenetically pressuring the White House to reject the Keystone XL pipeline. Meanwhile, in Michigan, environmentalists are equally as worried about the Enbridge pipeline that runs through the Straits of Mackinac.
All across the state of Michigan and all across the Great Lakes Basin, pipelines that are being expanded. This ultimately makes the Midwest the hub for transportation of tar sands and refining.
A spill in the Mackinac Straits would dump thousands of gallons of oil directly into Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, in the heart of the world's largest freshwater resource. A July 14th protest at the famed Mackinac Bridge sought to hold Enbridge accountable there. The rally, attended by environmental leader Bill McKibben, was organized by advocacy groups including 350.org, the National Wildlife Federation, and the Michigan Land Use Institute.
We are in the midst of a really big fundamental change in the type of fuel that we are getting in this country. There are a lot of backyards like this. There are a lot of places that are impacted. This shift that has been very quietly going on to tar sands oil from Canada.
NRDC and other advocacy groups published a report in 2011 which showed that heavy tar sands oil corrodes pipelines much quicker than conventional crude. Dilbit-carrying Canadian pipelines have ruptured 16 times more often than American pipelines, even though Canada's pipelines are much newer.
Usually when we think of oil, we think of, Jed Clampett going out and shooting the ground, and up from the ground comes a bubbling crude. Or you see pictures of, the old gushers in California. And this is something that is fundamentally different from that. This is a very large source of petroleum that is either strip mined or steamed out of the ground. Diluted bitumen pipelines operate in a fundamentally different way. First of all, they require significantly more pressure to move this really heavy, sludgy stuff through the pipe. They also operate at a higher temperature, very, very high in sulfur. That contributes to corrosion. It is more highly acidic than typical petroleum.
But the industry claims that tar sands oil flows no differently than conventional crude. It wasn't heavy diluted bitumen that caused the Kalamazoo River spill, say oil executives. It was faulty coating on the outside of the pipeline. In Enbridge's Kalamazoo office, spokesperson Jason Mansham performs a show-and-tell routine with 6 different oil samples. The diluted bitumen, he says, sounds just like water, implying that it's no less viscous than the others.
In fact, what's in my hand now, this is diluted bitumen. And I want you to listen. I'm going to get real quiet and listen to this. That's a pure liquid. All of the sand and the clay, those things that could be abrasive, they're extracted before it ever gets in the pipeline. We could not ship a product that is abrasive and maintain our terminals, the storage facilities, the pump stations, if there was something abrasive in it. It'd be much like if you fueled up your lawnmower now before going out for your first spring cut and you had sand in your gasoline. Would your lawnmower run for very long? No, it'd probably break down.
After the Kalamazoo River spill, local environment and municipal officials were surprised that the oil didn't remain on the surface, but began to sink to the bottom and encoat riverbank vegetation and wildlife. Enbridge didn't immediately reveal that diluted bitumen was involved, but officials eventually figured that out.
This was an oil that was heavy to begin with. Certain components of this oil began to volatilize, making an already heavy oil even heavier. My recollection is that within the first week to week and a half, they told us that diluted was involved.
It took quite a few days and quite a few direct conversations with the Enbridge CEO before he said, well, that's not how I would define it, but if that's how you define it, then yes, it was tar sands.
The byproduct of the tar sands oil, of course, was the benzene that escaped into the air and posed a health risk to nearby residents and first responders.
Diluents that allow it to flow through the pipe. Those are what are called the lighter ends of the oil, and those started immediately evaporating. And that was where the benzene came in.
We're very naive of the health effects of the oil could be, especially the benzene. So our crews naturally wanted to get on the river immediately and start working, but had to be pulled back.
Remarkably, 3 years later, Talmadge Creek, which was ground zero for the spill, and the Kalamazoo River itself have recovered. The waterland ecosystem looks clean, save for the occasional oil-marked tree, and fish and wildlife has returned. After Enbridge's initial omission to report the type of oil that spilled, it has received praise for its cleanup effort.
But you'll probably still see a little bit of oil here and there, especially if it's warm. The oil tends to come up and form ribbons of sheen and form globules.
But Marshall residents aren't out of the water yet. Claiming it needs to upgrade the pipeline coating and citing growing demand for its product, Enbridge is building a new 280-mile pipeline roughly parallel with the current one. Local residents, through whose backyards the current and new pipelines will run, are angry with Enbridge and worried about future oil spills.
What they're proposing to do is put another pipeline behind our house on their existing easement. They're going around our house. They're curving the pipe around our house. At that kind of pressure, what's that going to do with the pipe? The heat that's generated from these pipelines, how it melts the snow in the wintertime, and then also it kills the crops in the summer.
They've dealt poorly with individual landowners. They have been dismissive of local municipalities. They have been stubborn and intractable when it came to the regulatory process here in Michigan. Enbridge has skirted a lot of regulatory oversight because they've done this project piecemeal. And if they'd replaced the entire line all at once, they would have been subject to the same presidential permitting process as Keystone XL.
Bullied by Enbridge, landowners like Jeff Insco and Sue Connolly say that the biggest asset they have is each other. They'll be the ones on the front lines if another oil spill happens.
The first people that are going to know about a pipeline and know about a spill are the residents. It's going to be the people, it's going to be those that live here. It's not going to be the pipeline company, it's not going to be your first responders, it's not going to be any of them, it's going to be us.
While it is employing newer and better technology, Enbridge can't unequivocally guarantee that another oil spill won't happen, either in the Kalamazoo River or in the Straits of Mackinac.
Clearly we're not yet there, but we're putting all the pieces in place to minimize the risk of any leak. You know, much like I can't get on an airline tonight at Detroit Metro and they can't assure me there won't be any mechanical trouble with the plane or that the plane won't crash. But I can tell you that many procedures have changed internally at Enbridge and externally as well to minimize that risk.
That's not good enough for environmental advocates like the NRDC's Josh Mogerman.
We need to know how to move this stuff safely. We need to study and know if this stuff requires additional and different infrastructure to move it safely.